experiencing housing insecurity can access our programs. However, the design of our administrative system can pose barriers to people who have few resources and pose barriers to people who may need our programs the most. Administrative barriers existed long before COVID-19. However, the pandemic has exacerbated existing disparities. Before I discuss SSA's response to the effects of the pandemic, I want to highlight the data exchange between the Department of Housing and Urban Development and SSA. This exchange aligns with the Housing Is initiative, its focus on collaboration across systems to improve the life outcomes for low-income people. For several years before COVID-19, SSA and HUD collaborated on ways to reduce, if not eliminate, the need for HUD's tenants and applicants to visit SSA's offices in person. Removing the requirement to visit an SSA office helps preserve the resources of these individuals, including their time and transportation costs. And given the pandemic, this reduces potential health risks as well. The data exchange agreement allows SSA to provide HUD with a monthly data match. This match is used by HUD's public housing agencies, including members of CLAPFA. Am I pronouncing the acronym correctly? Okay. As well as provide owners and management agents to administer certain rental assistance programs. Instead of requiring the person to provide a benefit verification letter, HUD administrators processing a recertification application for housing assistance can use their enterprise income verification or EIV system to verify Social Security and supplemental security income benefits. PHAs, private owners, and management agents administering HUD rental assistance programs may register to access the EIV system on HUD's website. Individuals do not have to contact Social Security for a benefit verification letter if they are currently receiving HUD benefits and are reapplying for benefits, or if they are assisting with a reapplication. For new housing assistance applicants who may need to provide proof of Social Security benefits to a HUD administrator, it is still possible for them to skip the in-person SSA office visit by using a My Social Security account to obtain a copy of a benefit verification letter, SSA 1049 form, cost of living adjustment or COLA notice, Social Security award letter, or other SSA benefit documents. We are working to enhance our collaboration, including exploring ways to provide HUD with real-time data to streamline the application process for housing assistance applicants. SSA also helps HUD with information on borrower death to verify mortgage program benefits. Both of these data exchanges have been instrumental in streamlining the customer experience. As FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks discussed in the previous session, the prior remarks, there is still much we need to do to support digital equity. For those who do not have reliable access to the web, in-person assistance at SSA offices remains essential. On April 7th of this year, just last month, SSA's 1,230 field offices across the country reopened for walk-in service. To date, our re-entry efforts have gone smoothly overall. We are currently seeing between 80,000 to 90,000 visitors to our field offices each day. This is an increase from the 60,000 visitors per week who we saw by appointment during the pandemic. Given that many of the people we serve have health vulnerabilities and consistent with our union agreements, we are requiring safety measures for in-person service, including masking, social distancing, and self-health checks for COVID-19 symptoms. We provide masks for the public and for employees if they need them. We continue to modernize our systems to help as many people as possible meet their needs without traveling to our offices, or to save time when visiting in person by making an appointment when possible. I also encourage you to help SSA share time-saving tips. For example, for those planning to visit in person, customers should visit SSA's Get Help webpage if they're able to check the office status and best times to visit. This resource can be accessed through the COVID-19 banner at the top of SSA's website homepage. SSA field offices tend to be the busiest the first thing in the morning, early in the week, and during the early part of the month. So we encourage people to plan their visits at other times than these busy times. Sharing these tips could help customers experience fewer delays and shorter waits if they visit our offices without appointments. Alongside the impact of the pandemic on SSA field offices, COVID-19 reminded us how important it is for families and individuals to have access to high-speed, reliable internet and devices to keep up with school, work, and to use a range of health and social services like HUD, CLAPFA, and other organizations. SSA is promoting the Affordable Connectivity Program. And now I'm going to turn to the various roles SSA has played as part of the federal government's response to the pandemic. Providing cash assistance was a major pillar of the March 2021 American Rescue Plan. While SSA is not directly involved in issuing economic impact payments or EIPs, we work with the Treasury Department to help income supports reach SSI recipients, because often SSI recipients do not need to file federal tax returns. Social Security employees worked round the clock with IRS staff to ensure that the electronic file of Social Security and SSI recipients were complete, accurate, and ready to be used to issue payments. SSA does not count EIPs and certain other disaster assistance against eligibility for SSI or against recipients' SSI benefit amounts. SSA has also been working with the White House and Treasury to inform everyone that Social Security does not count the child tax credit against a person's SSI eligibility or payment amount unless the child tax credit payment is kept for more than 12 months. Our work on the CTC continues as we inform our beneficiaries about the simplified filing tool that was developed by Code for America to claim a child tax credit. We will send an email to approximately 27 million people who receive Social Security or SSI benefits and also have a My Social Security account. For those who do not have an online account, we will share information on our social media platforms in English and in Spanish. Since the advocacy community plays an important role reaching and supporting people in their communities, we will also share information with our network of thousands of advocate contacts and encourage them to share information with their clients. The child tax credit is important to millions of families, and those who receive SSI are no exception. We encourage anyone who might be eligible for benefits to apply and claim the child tax credit if they think they are eligible. And I believe that Veronica will also be discussing the CTC in her presentation. So I'm going to now turn to our other priorities at SSA. We launched our People Facing Barriers initiative in 2021, which covers a range of activities to remove barriers that limit access to Social Security programs and services, including for children, people with mental illnesses, people who are experiencing homelessness, individuals with low income, and those with limited English proficiency. Since the early months of the pandemic, we ramped up our interaction with advocacy groups and other stakeholder organizations. This helps ensure that we keep our customers' perspective in focus. During the pandemic, we saw disability application receipts fall, so we stepped up our outreach. We identified 1.4 million individuals who receive a Social Security, retirement, disability, or survivor benefit that is below the monthly SSI federal benefit rate, and began mailing them notices to let them know that they may be eligible for additional benefits. So far, we have approved nearly 20,000 new SSI claims and paid out nearly $4 million in additional benefits. For many low-income individuals, this additional SSI benefit is the difference between going without food or buying vital medicines. In March of this year, we launched a new online SSI protective filing tool. This tool allows individuals or someone assisting them to answer a few questions that provide us with sufficient information to schedule an appointment for an SSI application interview and protect the filing date for benefit purposes. As I mentioned earlier, program policy is complex, making it difficult to streamline the information we must collect. However, we are working to build on the success of the SSI Protective Filing Tool to create an online SSI application. Being able to file for SSI online increases access to our services, especially as we work across the government to address the digital divide and promote access to the web. Unfortunately, our current funding level will negatively affect services. Our budget is this year is nearly $850 million below the President's FY 2022 budget request. This means that we will not be able to hire the number of staff needed, even though we have reached the lowest level of staff in over 25 years. In addition, we have had to severely limit our overtime and delay several IT modernization projects, which is leading to longer wait times for our customers and bigger backlogs. The funding we received does not make up for the relatively flat funding we received the previous 4 years. The shortfall this year will result in more people waiting even longer to receive the help and benefits they are due, which is a concern that I know others in this room have. The President's FY 2023 budget request to Congress includes $14.8 billion for our administrative expenses, and this is an increase of approximately $1.4 billion over the FY 2022 budget. At this proposed funding level, we could handle significantly more work, putting us on the path to reverse the deterioration in service that we experienced during the pandemic. there is more we would like to do. For example, long-standing systemic health and social inequities have put many communities of color and low-income communities at increased risk for getting sick and dying from COVID-19. Social Security provides benefits for surviving family members when a worker dies, and widows and widowers, divorced widows and widowers, children and dependent parents may be eligible for benefits. As part of our equity work, we will increase awareness of Social Security survivors' benefits. Finally, I would like to note that SSA is an active member of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. At the Council, SSA works with HUD and over a dozen other federal agencies to prevent and end homelessness. If you have suggestions for SSA's work in this area, or you want to learn more, I encourage you to contact members of my team who are sitting right over here. And I just want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to discuss what SSA is doing to help people facing barriers, including individuals and families receiving or eligible to receive housing benefits. These issues have been important to me long before I joined SSA. As an acting commissioner of the Social Security Administration, my goal is to ensure that everyone who is eligible for SSA's programs receives them. If there is anyone, if there's one thing that I hope that you will take away from my remarks today, please remember that SSA's collaboration with HUD and PHAs helps to reach and better serve people facing barriers. Thanks so much.
Awesome. That was a great way to tee up what I was going to chat about today. So my name is Veronica Helms. I'm a researcher in HUD's Office of Policy Development and Research. One of my main topic areas is data linkage. So I'm very excited to have already heard a lot of folks talk about data linkage and the opportunities there. So today I'm going to be talking about uptake and usage of the child tax credit among HUD-assisted families with children. Next slide, please. So when the advanced child tax credit opportunity first came about, this administration came to the office that I sit, the Office of Policy Development and Research, and said, this new benefit is available. We'd like to know, how many HUD-assisted families with children are eligible for this benefit. And to no one's surprise here, we see that the vast majority of folks are eligible for this benefit. Excuse me, so about 1.6 million HUD-assisted families and about 3.3 million children can potentially be impacted by the advanced CTC. And we calculated that the payments would increase the average HUD-assisted income by about 38%. And again, talking about EITC, over 95% of HUD-assisted families with children are eligible. But the one thing that we came across that was really kind of the sticking point is that approximately 62% of HUD-assisted families with children report an income below $18,000, which means they're below the threshold that they have to file taxes for. And as many folks know, again, that a lot of the child tax credit payments were automatic if folks had filed taxes last year. But if you didn't do that, then you wouldn't necessarily get that payment. So we came across this kind of sticking point where we said, okay, we know all these folks are eligible, but we know that not all of them are going to get this benefit unless they sign up. So the administration really wanted to focus on outreach to HUD-assisted families with children to try to get uptake of this benefit. Next slide, please. Oh my gosh. Sorry about that. So I don't know how many folks are familiar with the Census Household Pulse Survey. If you've ever worked with census data, you know it can be a bit slow, it can be a bit outdated. And this was the first time Census had really said, when the pandemic hit the US, Census really said, okay, we need a quick data solution to get data on social and economic situation of folks living in the US. And we really need it to be a federal agency partnership. So it's a really cool survey in the sense that it deployed in April of 2020, and it started off as a weekly data collection mechanism, then went bi-weekly, then went monthly. But USDA manages questions on food insecurity, HUD manages questions on housing insecurity, SSA manages questions on receipt of those benefits. So it's a really cool kind of interagency survey that's really meant to capture, what are the social and economic circumstances of folks throughout the pandemic. So we've really been trying to keep our finger, particularly at HUD, on the housing eviction crisis. So in July of 2021, the Household Pulse Survey introduced a child tax credit question. And we've been kind of monitoring using data linkage. We've been monitoring results of that question linked with HUD administrative data. Next slide, please. So again, this is self-reported, it's not perfect, but the question about how many folks, how many HUD-assisted families with children had reported uptake, we see that about 68% of folks reported that they had received it, and this corresponds to about 1.1 million households. All right, so this is, we're gonna start getting a little more specific on uses of this data. So what I found to be interesting is that over half of HUD-assisted families with children reported that they actually use their credit to pay off debt, whereas only about 33% mostly spent it and about 13% saved it. So what do they use their child tax credit for? There was essentially a checkbox that said, what did you use this payment for? We see that the most folks, about 68% of those that received it, reported using it for housing or utilities. We saw that housing and utilities, particular utilities, were kind of the number one driver of what folks were using it for. About 58% using it for food, about 40% using it for school or childcare, 53% using it for clothing, and about 35% using it for transportation. So this is a little in the weeds, a little data-y, but what I really wanted to display on this slide is that to track the administration's effort in, I say the administration, but also everyone in this room that has helped to push out the child tax credit and get those benefits applied for. We tried to really track uptake over time. And we're seeing that the more data we get, the more statistical significance we're getting, in the sense that we think that outreach efforts are working, and that folks are, that more HUD-assisted families with children are reporting uptake of this benefit, which is super exciting. Again, it's not significant now, but the more data we get, the closer we're getting to significance. So there does seem to be a clear increase in self-reported uptake over time. And again, as we get more data, we're hoping that we can say that this is statistically significant. And we think that from the various outreach efforts that folks on the ground have been doing, that we think we've signed up about 105,000 additional new families from when the benefits first rolled out. Because I think it's important to note that a lot of the leadership really wanted to focus on building trust and figuring out how to get the right folks in front of these people, because with the world of fraud today, it sounds kind of like a scam, like give your social security number to the government and they're going to mail you a check. Like I would be skeptical of that. Like, so we really had to figure out like how to do the messaging so that it wasn't, folks weren't fearful of fraud, and how we could go to reach that. So, we're always updating the data. It's a little bit slow, not as slow as it used to be, but a little bit slower, about a few months behind. But we are working on publishing the results. And if you have any questions or ideas for research, I'm always happy to talk about data linkage, and any of that. So I will now toss it over, but thank you guys for your time.
Good afternoon. All right, come on, guys. We can do a little bit better than that, right? Good afternoon. All right, I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll take it. Thank you so much first to the Council of Large Public Housing Authorities for having me. My name is David Lloyd, and I serve as the Deputy Chief of Programs for Economic Mobility at Martha's Table. And within my work, I'm charged with leading the execution and implementation of our newest business line, Economic Mobility, which encompasses three respective pillars of programming: career pathways, direct investments, and finally, entrepreneurship supports. Within today's presentation, I'll primarily focus on our work in direct investments, specifically around our cash transfer programs. But before getting there, first going to give you a little bit of history about Martha's Table. And first, next slide, please. All right, here we have it. First, in Martha's Table, we believe that every Washingtonian deserves the opportunity to thrive, not merely survive, not merely live on the fringes, but to actually thrive, and thrive specifically within Washington, D.C. For over 42 years, we've been committed to a more equitable Washington, D.C., and that means serving our neighbors on both sides of the Anacostia River. We do this through the execution of various programs, namely our nationally accredited early child education programs in both wards 1 and 8, pairing healthy food access with other resources, namely around health and wellness. So we offer groceries day in and day out. In fact, the location in which I traveled down from had its market open and folks were leaving with bags of groceries. But in addition to groceries, we also provide health and wellness services around everything from fitness courses to recipes and food demonstrations, and even baseline mental health services. So really taking a holistic approach. And finally, by promoting family access through leadership. And so we offer various support programs such as our parent cafes, our Baby and Me program, as well as Fathers to the Front, which really help propel our neighbors into the forefront of leadership in their homes as well as in the community. Next slide, please. We know that our vision of seeing every DC resident thrive is really complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which really exacerbated an economic crisis and gentrification that in this city specifically is really rampant. And I look at it like a runaway greenhouse effect if we were using a parallel with the changes in our atmosphere. So to combat these challenges in which I just uplifted, we must do a few things. We must first trust our neighbors, which means actually listening to them, centering their voices in the agencies that exist within our community. We must act with urgency. Prior to the pandemic starting, I believe that there was probably a 10 to 15-year window to really support our families and thriving in DC. That window is now shrunk by virtue of the pandemic, which is obviously taking the last 2 years of our lives. It's really again, made a bad situation worse. We must act with courage. And quite frankly, that means challenging the status quo within our own organizations, within the respective industries in which we work, to ensure that we can stand alongside our neighbors and show up in a way in which is meaningful. And lastly, to address root causes. Now, we all know that root causes ultimately speak to system issues, but there are investments that we can make on an individual basis and from an organizational level that I believe collectively we can address root causes. Next slide, please. So speaking of bold action and activity, on March 13th, 2020, which was a day probably many of us remember because it was the week in which a lot of things started being impacted by this pandemic, we announced a bold new strategy to make a huge investment, $1.4 million, as you see, into cash transfers, baby items, and grocery store gift cards, with $1.2 million of which go into our cash transfer programs. And we did this in recognition of the economic downturn that we expected to happen. And unfortunately, it did happen. We also did that in anticipation of closing our early child education centers, which also happened. So because that happened, we knew that our parents, our neighbors would have to come home to support their families. We knew that our neighbors would be the ones whose jobs would be impacted. And unfortunately, that happened too. So because of that, we invested again, 1.2 million of this 1.4 million into a cash transfer program that provided $9,000 in direct cash assistance to the 137 families enrolled in our early child education centers. And this program worked as indicated by our findings. For starters, these resources proved to be invaluable to families. By April, 9 out of our 10 families reported having impacts in their financial lives due to the pandemic. Second, 99% of our families said the support was helpful or very helpful in keeping them financially secure. 60% of our families reported loss in income, and that meant income wiped out entirely or being impacted dramatically. And this is consistent with the fact that a lot of our families worked in industries that were hardest hit by the pandemic. Third, 94% of our families used the cash towards housing or utilities costs. And this is consistent with data that Victoria shared in the past presentation. And lastly, cash reduced stress in the household. Look, we know our families that come from under-resourced and underserved communities already had stress in the household. But this pandemic caused a lot of additional stress. And I'll say, as a dad of a 4-year-old, I have grown a greater respect for what folks in early childhood education do, because boy, I too was stressed behind trying to be a teacher and everything else. Next slide, please. All right, so the success in this program spawned a whole nother collaboration, in this case titled Thrive East of the River. And this is a partnership between 4 entities, and it was formed in June of 2021. So if you're keeping note, we had our first cash transfer program in June 2020, March 2020, correction, second of which in June 2021. So this partnership, back to the partnership here in collaboration, is between Martha's Table, Bread for the City, 11th Street Bridge Park, otherwise known as Building Bridges Across the River, and the Far Southeast Family Strengthening Collaborative. And within this collaborative here, over a 5-month period, we provided $5,500 in direct cash assistance to over 500 families. But in addition to merely providing funding, we also provided access to groceries, dry goods, and concrete supports, ranging from baby items, formula, and diapers, to cleaning supplies and other items that we know during the pandemic were in very high demand and were scarce. Quickly on findings, 54% of our neighbors reported spending all or almost all or a lot of technical terms to the evaluators probably get me on this one, of their payments on rent or mortgage payments. So again, consistent with the idea that our families, when given an opportunity to have unconditional funding with no strings attached, funding that didn't say, hey, David, we're going to give you this money, but we expect you to spend it here or there, spent it in areas that meant the most to them. Continuing with that theme, 90% reported using at least a portion of their funds on housing costs. And finally, 42% of neighbors reported spending all or almost all of their payments on food. Before moving on, again, I just want to uplift the point that, again, when given an opportunity, families use the money on items that meant the most to them. And this is important to uplift again, because I think there are harmful narratives out there that exist around what families and what community members will do with funding when they have complete carte blanche and complete autonomy. And quite frankly, those narratives are harmful and I believe are racist in nature. So again, it's incredibly important to uplift that very point. Next slide, please. All right, so the momentum generated through these 2 programs ultimately led to our current initiative, which we're really excited about, as you can probably tell, which is titled Strong Families, Strong Futures DC. And it's awesome because this is a collaboration between Martha's Table and the District of Columbia's Deputy Mayors for Planning and Economic Development, AKA DMPED. And this is the first publicly funded cash transfer program in the district. Now, of course, Martha's Table had done this in March of 2020, June of 2021, and now this program that we're currently implementing. But there was also programs of this type happening across the country, right? So there was momentum generated, not just here in DC, but also in other places, namely Stockton, California, Compton, and Jackson, Mississippi come to mind, but there were others out there. So shout out to everybody in each respective public, private collaboration and entities that have engaged in this work. So with Strong Families, Strong Futures DC, which we refer to as SFSF internally, over 12 months, 132 new and expecting mothers will receive $10,800 of direct cash assistance. Just to define the populations of new and expecting mothers, new moms are those that have a child 3 months of age or younger as of the point of the application, and expecting mothers are mothers in their 2nd or 3rd trimester. So in addition to this funding, which by the way, $10,800 represents approximately a third of the cost of raising an infant in DC, according to data that we found. It's between $25,000 and $30,000 a year, which again, I know, well, not unfortunately, but I know, because I have a 4-year-old now. So in addition to the funding, which again is really quite a substantial amount, mothers have access to groceries. Again, we do groceries at Martha's Table, early child education, and we do that too. And other concrete supports like diapers and formula and other household supplies as well. So our application for this program opened in late February, closed in March, and there were 1,500 applications. Again, there are 132 program slots, 1,500 applications, so it was a huge demand. Here are some findings from the application. Nearly 74% of applications received were from mothers in Ward 7 and 8. And for those that are unfamiliar, that's east of the Anacostia River. I will tell you all, I'm a resident of Ward 7, so go Ward 7. In terms of public benefits, this was data self-reported during the application. 65% of mothers indicated that they received SNAP, 38% are accessing TANF, and 10% accessing housing vouchers. And I want to put a pin in this one really quickly, because as we move towards program implementation, we recognize that it might be impacts to public benefits. And this is quite a bit of a pain point. And I think that this is a pain point for all cash transfer programs, many of which at least, because there hasn't been much policy investment because, well, these programs are new. So they're rather novel in nature. But with in collaboration with the District of Columbia politicians, and namely Councilmember McDuffie, there's been emergency legislation passed to protect TANF, which is utterly groundbreaking. And we're really hopeful that other policies of this type will be implemented not only here in the district, but also at other states and cities, and obviously at the federal level as well, to try to protect these types of benefits rather from these types of programs, which fundamentally are great. But unfortunately, right now, the only way public agencies can account for this type of money is income, right? So we have to change that narrative, which, for the record, Martha's Table refers to it as a gift from our perspective. Now back to the data. 86% of applicants reported income between 0 and 32,000, which tells us that we're supporting mothers that need the most support. And finally, 643 expecting mothers applied and 594 new mothers. Next slide, please. All right, so a linchpin of what we do within Martha's Table and surely within our programming is to lead and to execute programs with the dignity and respect of our neighbors that they truly deserve. So there are two fundamental questions that we ask ourselves and that we ask the community, obviously. First being, what does the community say they want and need? So this implies first that we talk to our community, but second, and probably more important, we actually listen. And I'll say that, this might seem like a novel idea, but unfortunately, from my experience, working in government and working in other public places, quite frankly, we don't do that enough. I think we oftentimes make assumptions and we attempt to solve problems for our community as opposed to merely asking them. Second, we ask, what does Martha's Table have permission and trust to do? And I think that reflects our approach, our humble approach towards service delivery. We're not coming in saying, oh, because we plant a flag in your neighborhood in 2018, I was pictured on the first slide, that we suddenly have your permission and trust, that we suddenly have credibility. No, instead, we assess really what that looks like. And through conversation and through dialogue, through real engagement, we're better able to assess whether or not we have permission and trust to do certain things. And so for us, looking at our cash assistance program, these are questions we asked ourselves. And ultimately, we decided that it was in our best interest and in the best interest of our community to give folks a freedom of choice to do what is best for their family. And again, that's exactly what we saw. In the data that is presented thus far, the data that you will find in other programs, folks do what they need to do with their money. And they make correct decisions time and time again. Our families conduct cost benefit analysis every day. Okay, so we know that these things work. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Maybe it doesn't want to go. Maybe it's okay. There we go. I was about to say, do I have a wrap-up sign going or something like that? All right, so really quickly, looking ahead to our next 5 years, Martha's Table at the start of the pandemic not only launched that cash transfer program, but decided to actually start planning for what the next 5 years will look like. And so when most places were, closing their doors and shuttering and things of that nature, we said, in fact, we're going to actually look at how we can almost reinvent ourselves and how best we can stand alongside our neighbors. And we did that by engaging them in our 5-year strategic plan. And there was over 1,000 meaningful touch points with our community members from various community groups to essentially get an understanding of what exactly they say they want and need. And so there were 5 themes that emerged from those conversations. which by extension of when we were doing this were mostly digital. However, we did have an opportunity to convene with some of our families in socially distanced forums as well. Back to the 5 themes. First, our neighbors want true and trusted neighbors. And this is critical because in many instances here in the district, at least I can speak for, organizations have shown up, they've planted flags, they've overpromised and they've underdelivered. Essentially, our neighbors have been lied to. So our neighbors are saying, we're kind of tired of being lied to. Second, economic mobility. And this is what I do right here. So I'm excited about this one. We know that efforts to outpace inflation have really been unsuccessful. And so there's been higher levels of poverty, as I mentioned earlier, gentrification and other economic factors that are existing and taking place right here in our neighborhood make it difficult for true social mobility to occur. And so programs and supports designed to do 2 things, not only provide stability, but then stability, if you look at it from a foundational perspective, got you 3 minutes, but also mobility as well, which is incredibly important. Third, mental and emotional wellness. And again, with under-resourced and underserved communities, things of this type just don't exist. So the community, and recognizing that there are needs that are not being met, uplifted to us that this is something that they need. Now, there are certain things that are within scope and outside of scope for any organization. And this is one in which we kind of teeter on the line of, but we realize that we can provide baseline mental health services, workshops, forums, things of this nature, but also partner with another entity that does this from a specialty area. Fourth, transitions from late youth to adulthood. And this is critical because if you've heard the term disconnected youth, we know that happens at about that 16 to 24 range. Okay, so it's a highly pivotal time in someone's life. And also they're extremely vulnerable. So they uplifted to us that they wanted supports to help young people make that transition. And finally, and this is an example of another area that is out of scope for us, trauma related to a lack of public safety. So in this case, our objective is to be an ally, to amplify messaging around what are the needs and what are really the collateral impacts of a lack of public safety. All right, probably down to 2 minutes, so I'll wrap this up here really quickly. Next slide, please. All right, here we go. So as I mentioned, our objective is to see families move from stability to mobility. And so then investment at the point of entry into our early child education programs, which run from ages 6 weeks to 4 years of age, excuse me. Investing in entrepreneurship and small businesses. We know that our community members often lack access to capital and resources to help their dreams come true. So we've opted to utilize our resources to help make that happen. And our initial investments will be in the space of food. Martha's Table is a food-based organization, and so it should come as no surprise that that's a focal point initially. And so we're transitioning our commercial kitchen into a community kitchen, which will provide a resource to community members that are specifically into the food space, an opportunity to stabilize and grow their businesses via this community kitchen. Oh, I'm getting a wrap-up sign now, guys. All right, here lastly, mini grants, again, providing access to much needed capital. All right, and now I'm done. Last slide, which you'll see here in a moment, is encouraging you to come out, volunteer with us, get involved, get engaged. Again, I'm David Lloyd. It should show there in a moment. And so happy to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You all know we're running just slightly late today. We do have time for just 1 or 2 questions if folks have. If you are here in the room and you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, stand up. I think, yeah.
Hi, David. Thanks for the presentation for everyone. I have a question around asset building. So you mentioned, I think all of you mentioned some of the uses of funds, which were to immediate sort of housing cost needs and utilities, food. These are all critical needs. But thinking about, especially areas east of the river that are gentrifying, the property values are rapidly increasing, and making sure that folks can take advantage of those opportunities. What do you see in terms of being able to give people access to asset building through programs such as UBI or things like this?
Yes. All right, testing. Okay, looks like this is working. So I'll first state that in each of our cash transfer programs, we provided access to financial empowerment services, financial education that are designed to obviously not only arm people with the tools they need, but also other supports through programs. I'll actually uplift the Capital Area Asset Builders, which is an organization here based in DC that is extremely tapped into the different supports and programs and services that are in that space. So ultimately, we want to see our families, utilize the funding that comes through the cash transfer programs and leverage that in other spaces to continue to build assets that allow purchases of homes or other things that are truly beneficial to wealth building. So it's something that we again place a good deal of emphasis on, and realize that this is an opportunity for us to partner with folks that are SMEs, so to speak, in that space.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I do know that, as the acting commissioner mentioned, our panelists are all eager to continue to connect with you going forward. You all are leaders in your communities and helping to bridge the space between your residents and the organizations and the administration. So thank you so much. We so appreciate your time and expertise.